Hi, welcome to Hannity. Tonight, it is a story as old as time itself. A Democratic mayor from Illinois accused of corruption. Imagine that. Now, during an explosive town hall, the so-called worst mayor in America confronted by her constituents. Here's a quick preview.
Tiffany, to everybody, every resident, I'm sorry. I apologize if I seemed irate. I had my radiation today. I have cancer. Of course I do. Tiffany stole money from a cancer foundation. How dare you? How dare you steal? And I helped you with your campaign. How dare you steal from us?
It even got more wild. We'll have more highlights coming up later on. Also, guess what? Pothole Pete, Mayor Pete, is trying his luck as an electric car and truck salesperson. California passed a new law that drives up inflation even more. We'll get to that and two breaking news stories about illegal immigrants, violent crime. It should shock every American to its core. Why it's not, I don't know. But first, it is a tough pill to swallow for so many on the left. You see that? 215 days. This is an inflection point for this country. This is a tipping point for this country. There is a very real possibility that Donald J. Trump can be your president-elect. Anything can happen in 215 days, but Trump is now consistently pulling ahead of Biden in almost every single battleground state. According to a brand new Wall Street Journal poll just out, well, Trump is leading in 6 out of 7 swing states, up by 5 in the important state of Arizona, 4 in Nevada, 3 in Michigan, 3 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Georgia. That needs to get larger, 6 in North Carolina, and in the 7th state, Wisconsin, Trump and Biden are tied. Let us be clear, very clear. These results are not unusual. In poll after poll, President Trump is beating Biden nationwide and beating him in what we believe will be the key swing states. But according to Dr. Jill Biden, well, the polls don't really exist. They are but a mere figment of your imagination. Take a look.
People know the choice this election. They can choose chaos or they can choose, steady wisdom, experience. So
there's not a part of you that's a little worried because you seem to be off kilter a little bit.
No, I feel that Joe will be reelected.
But when these polls, like the Wall Street Journal one, land in the White House and he's losing in all the battleground states.
No, he's not losing in all the battleground states. He's coming up and he's even or doing better. So you know what? Once people start to focus in and they see their two choices, it's obvious that Joe will win this election.
All right.
I was wondering, maybe you were wondering the same thing. Where was Joe Biden during that discussion? Now, according to RNC research, think about this. It has been a whopping 279 days since President Joe actually participated in a real live sit-down interview. In other words, Joe is back hiding in his basement with a few campaign visits and a lot of fundraisers sprinkled in here, there when they can. Now, it's not because he doesn't have the time, because Joe frequently spends entire days without anything on his public calendar. This lie the White House has been telling us, he gets more done in an hour than most Americans get done in a day. That's a lie. Anyway, it's pretty unheard of, that light schedule for any president, especially if you're running for re-election. Now, even when Joe does have a teleprompter and a friendly audience, it is, well, always a struggle. Here is but the latest example of your president. Take a look.
I'm proud. I'm proud of my administration has taken on Big Pharma in the most significant ways ever. And I wouldn't have done without Bernie, and Bernie got it, look. But the Republicans were able to cut back on the fact that they only were not able, the only thing they couldn't defeat was seniors. It cuts the deficit by $160 billion. Now, this spring is here. The seasons and allergies are upon us.
For the mumbling, bumbling, stumbling incoherence, I think I need an interpreter, because he's now attempting to navigate what has become an increasingly difficult political landscape. The numbers are very clear. They're very consistent. James Carville says they are horrific, horrendous. African Americans, Hispanic Americans, young people, all turning on Biden because of what? his border disaster, horrible economy and inflation, violent crime, people don't have law and order and safety and security. And at the same time, the president's very woke base, they are demanding even more illegal immigration, more spending, more defund, dismantle, reimagine the police and no bail laws. Meanwhile, President Biden's support among Muslim voters, that is now bottomed out because of, quote, his assistance to Israel in its war against terrorism in Gaza. As a result, by the way, Joe Biden keeps literally abandoning our #1 ally, Israel, as they are in a real fight for their very survival. If you have friends like Joe, you don't need friends like that. But his critical voting bloc in states like Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, they are demanding that Joe capitulate to the radicals that run his party. In fact, during last night's Democratic primary in the Badger State, take a look at this. More than 40,000 uninstructed ballots were cast, in part, at least, to protest the fact that Biden kind of helped Israel a little. But he's really been stabbing them in the back the entire time. Now, that's more than enough votes to swing the general election in the tightly contested state of Wisconsin. And let's not forget, Biden is now also forced to contend with an independent challenge from the left as RFK Jr. looks poised to siphon off a considerable amount of that vote. By the way, we've done a full vetting of Robert Kennedy Jr. I actually like the guy. He's no conservative. We will go through that in detail. Now, of course, the president, his supporters will have plenty of money to spend, much of it from anonymous donors and super PACs. And remember, Biden once bashed, so-called dark money raised by political action committees. Quote, he said, "There's too much money that flows in the shadows to influence our elections, and it erodes public trust." Exactly what he's doing. Now, in case if you're wondering, Joe does not apply the same standard to himself. The super PAC that is bolstering his reelection, they have raised millions in dark money from anonymous donors. Now, Trump and the RNC, meanwhile, get this, and everyone had been writing them off as dead, gone, and buried. They raised a whopping $65 million in March. None of it was dark money. Now, clearly, as Biden is struggling in the polls, all of his holier-than-thou proclamations have gone by the wayside. Remember, he once promised unity, nowhere to be found. His goal to bring back, quote, decency to the White House, okay, that's his last, probably as laughable as what? Hunter Biden's career, and his pledge to empower an independent judiciary, that was a flat-out lie. Biden even reportedly demanded that his own DOJ investigate and prosecute his chief political rival, and they're doing it. The DOJ then dutifully is doing their job. In November, you have the opportunity to elect somebody that would be far more authentic, with a much better track record, who is clearly a fighter for this country, that will reestablish America's strength on the world stage, that understands the needs to control our borders, bring back law and order and safety and security, and by the way, ran a much better economy than Joe Biden ever dreamed of. And that's going to be the difference in just 215 days. Now, by the way, or you can treat it like a retirement house like Joe does, the White House, in between trips to Delaware. All right, let's look deeper into these polls. Joining us now, pollster Matt Towery. He's with Insider Advantage, along with the founder of the Trafalgar Group, Robert Cahaly, and former senior advisor to the Clintons, pollster, well, that's Mark Penn is with us. All right, let's start with you, Matt Towery. Look, the polls are consistent. Your polls have shown the same. Robert's polls have shown the same. Mark, I don't see you polling as much, but you're an interesting voice here. Matt, it's 215 days out. You can't count on polls at this point, but they do mean something. What do they mean?
Well, they mean a couple of things. I look at them more right now from a strategic standpoint. For example, we now see the effect of these third-party candidates. They do drain from Biden. That's a serious issue that Biden has to deal with. But I also realize that we're still going to have this setup of the way the Democrats are able to gather votes and get votes in. Every one of these battleground states is going to be a nip-tuck race in the very end. We all know it. You know that as well, Sean. It's going to be a real battle. But I will say one other thing. I look at the Biden campaign campaign, and I think their strategy is a P and A campaign. In other words, they want to see Trump go to prison or be found guilty in New York, and they're hanging their hopes partially on that. And they're also hanging their hopes on abortion, because they now believe, particularly now in Florida now, that that's an issue on the ballot in November, that they can broaden the field and they can make things more competitive and bring more female voters out who were brought out in 2022. So that's their strategy, and also to deflect, which is what they do basically every day to try to rope-a-dope this thing through like they did in the last election.
And Robert, we know what the playbook is. They will demagogue on abortion. Republicans, they better have a good answer. And they also need to understand where the country is. If people were to ask me my personal views, okay, I'm pretty pro-life. If you're asking me politically where a politician needs to be, I would say the Dobbs decision of 15 weeks, that's where the country is. And if Republican politicians don't understand that, then, and they run on that, they're going to get their asses kicked and they're going to lose. You agree or not?
Absolutely, and it's also the way that you talk about it. I mean, when the word ban is being thrown around, Republicans are losing. When you start talking about simple limitations, reasonable limitations, and talk about the extreme being third trimester abortion and partial birth, Republicans are winning. So they have to be willing to fight that fight and stake their position and make it clear as a bill where they stand and where the extremists in abortion really are and who they are.
Yeah, and Mark Penn, just on this one issue before I ask you about the Democratic Party, the Democrats will demagogue this. There were more ads run in New York in the congressional, my former congressional district, in the last runoff campaign to fill the Santos seat than any other topic. They are banking on abortion and lying to women about abortion. Dobbs allowed the states to decide. That's all that changed. And California, New York, they'll have very liberal laws. Other states will have more conservative laws with some restrictions. But there will be legal abortion in America in perpetuity, it seems, based on public sentiment today. Do you agree?
Well, yes. I mean, when you look at our polls, the Harris poll, really Trump's winning about by 2 points, which means he's winning by 2 to 5 in a lot of the swing votes, swing states, and I think that's exactly what you see. I think the key swing voters are going to be these suburban women voters, and they are going to be cross-pressured between the economy that they don't see as good and what they see as a fundamental right to abortion. And in Florida now, given that DeSantis put in a 6-week bill, they're now going to be on the ballot a 23-week bill. So the choice isn't going to be 15 weeks or not. It's going to be 6 or 23. And this could bring a lot of Democrats out in Florida. So this is a good issue for the Democrats in this current political environment in a close race where Trump is leading.
Why is Biden bleeding over 20 points African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and young people?
Well, look, the polls are showing that, but will that really be true on Election Day? We've seen that several times, where during the election period, before the bases really come together, that votes begin to sag or drift.
But never this big, Mark. I agree with you. We've seen signs that it might be real and it doesn't materialize, and in the end, people go back home.
Grown. It's
What's
always
that?
grown. Trump has grown those. Trump grew those numbers from 16, the votes he got in the black community, and even more in 20. So it's always been on an upswing. And if the Republicans get 25% of the black vote and 45% of the minority vote, of the Hispanic vote, you can spend all the time you want worried about suburban women. They're not going to matter.
All right, quick response, Mark.
Yeah, I just don't think that's how it's going to come down in the final days. In the final days, I think the black community will come back to Biden and the Democrats, and the suburban women will be the critical voters, and that will be a choice between the economy and immigration, and maybe crime, and abortion and climate change on the other hand.
All right. Matt, you get the last word. You agree or disagree?
Well, I don't think this suburban voter issue is not as big to me because you're going to get what you're going to get. The bigger issue is how big is the intensity going to be for the turnout for Trump that he maintains, and how much can these independent candidates and how many get on the ballot can they siphon away? That's going to decide this election this time. And I will say one other thing. The Republicans need to get going right now because you win elections in April and May, not in November.
All right, Matt, Robert, Mark, thank you all. We appreciate it. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, Trump's swing state lead is likely bolstered by voters who trust Trump more than Biden. On the economy, inflation, immigration. Immigration again and again shows up as the #1 issue on people's minds. Anyway, here with reaction, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. One thing I keep reading is not only are the Biden people signaling that they're going to target Florida. I think their odds are very low. That's my take. But also your state of Texas. This has been a dream of the Democratic Party for a long time, knowing if they flip Texas, it's probably game, set, match. It's over for a long time.
Look, Sean, that's exactly right. We've got a battle nationally. The polling numbers we're seeing nationally are encouraging, but it's close. It's going to be a battle to see who shows up and who votes. And when it comes to Texas, Chuck Schumer has been explicit. He's coming after Texas. I am his #1 target in the entire country. I'm on the ballot. I'm running for re-election. And the Democrats are coming after me. They are going to spend more than $100 million this year. George Soros is already spending millions of dollars in the state of Texas. My opponent, a liberal Democrat named Colin Allred, is outraising Beto O'Rourke, my last opponent, 3-1. They are flooding millions of dollars into Texas. And the reason is simple. You remember my last re-elect? It was a 3-point race. I won by 2.6%. And so Chuck Schumer, his view is he floods millions into Texas. He gains 3 points, and that's how they win. And I'll tell you how we're fighting back against it. You've got the Democrat fat cats. You've got big tech. You've got celebrities writing checks to my opponent. We're supported by millions of Americans, millions of conservatives all across this country that go to our website. It's tedcruz.org. They go to tedcruz.org. They give $25 or $50 or $100. That's how we stand up to the George Soroses and the Chuck Schumers and the Mark Zuckerbergs is the $25 and $50 at tedcruz.org, because we got to fight to defend Texas. Texas, we lose the whole country.
But by the way, I was there. I was on the ground. I was covering your race at the time. I remember it was that close, and I remember many a conversation we had at the time. It's amazing how fast 6 years go by. But I don't think they're going to succeed, and I'll tell you why. Because Texas, more than any other state, has had to deal with Biden's disaster at the border. You have been in the forefront. Governor Abbott has been in the forefront of fighting. I don't know how you felt. When I read that now they're flying people direct, you don't have to pass go, collect $200. You don't have to make the difficult trip to our border. Now they're just flying people in directly with American taxpayer money from whatever country they're coming from, to whatever state they want to go to. But they're targeting Florida and Texas and dropping and dumping 90% of these illegal immigrants in your state and now my state.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. The 10.4 million illegal immigrants that Joe Biden and the Democrats have deliberately let in, they're letting them in because they view them as future Democrat voters. They hope as many of them as possible will vote illegally right now. They want them to stay in Texas. They want them to be in Florida because they want to flip our states. Look, if they bring 1 million illegal immigrants into Texas and they vote Democrat, Texas is in real trouble. And that's what the Democrats are aiming at. It's why they're flooding our state. And I got to say, the point you just made, you're right. It's not just the invasion every day at the southern border of thousands upon thousands of people coming. The Biden administration is literally flying people in from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Haiti. Last year, 320,000 people, the Biden administration flew from their countries to America. They flew them to over 40 different airports in America. They won't tell us which ones. But you want to know the consequences. We saw just 2 weeks ago a tragic story about a Haitian that the Biden administration flew in from Haiti. They flew him to Boston, Massachusetts, and just 2 weeks ago, he was arrested for brutally raping a 15-year-old girl who's severely disabled. This is what the Biden administration is doing, is literally bringing criminals to our communities. And it's Texas, it's Florida, and it's every other state in the union.
You know, I've said this before, Senator. I said this is a tipping point. This is an inflection point.
Yes.
I've never been more concerned about our country, borders, the economy, law and order, America's place in the world, war in Europe, war in the Middle East, things heating up even more every day, a new axis of evil. These are consequential times. This will be a consequential election, and we will live with the government we vote for.
Well, and you know what makes that perfectly clear? The Democrat Party abandoning Israel, Chuck Schumer demanding the elected leader of Israel step down, Joe Biden orchestrating the United Nations to effectively condemn Israel. That's never happened before. It's how radical they're getting. If you want Israel to stand with America's support, we got to win in November. That means Donald Trump needs to win. It also means I need your support in Texas. So please come to tedcruz.org and let's fight to pull this country back.
You know, Joe Biden and his administration stabbing Israel in the back has been repulsive.
Yeah.
It has been to watch the reason why to cater to the radicals that have now taken over the Democratic Party. It is beyond my comprehension. It really is. Senator Cruz, thank you. When we come back, all right, all these leftist policies, they're getting more ridiculous by the day. Actually are going to be shocked, and they're all going to have dire consequences for you and your family and your wallet. Larry Kudlow examines that straight ahead. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, well, liberal policies, they're growing more asinine and idiotic by the day. Now, despite pushback from the American people, consumers, people that actually spend real money, well, Pothole Pete, your transportation secretary, he continues to try to push electric vehicles, whether you want it or not, all in an attempt to appease the Green New Deal climate alarmist religious cult. Earlier today, he actually made this ridiculous comparison. You decide.
Let's be clear that the automotive sector is moving toward EVs, and we can't pretend otherwise. Sometimes when these debates happen, I feel like it's the early 2000s, and I'm talking to some people who think that we can just have landline phones forever.
No, just the opposite is true. After Ford lost $4.5 billion last year, they decided to cut back on their EV line because nobody was buying the cars. And I say that as somebody, I hope a company like Tesla is successful because it'll create jobs right here in this country. And if people want the choice of an electric car, they should have it. I'm all for it. Meanwhile, but if you want a gas-powered car, you should have the freedom to get that too. Meanwhile, California's fast food minimum wage, remember, it went to $20 an hour. It is already wreaking havoc on prices for people all across the state. But that is not stopping from New York, from the state of New York, for pushing a similar increase, despite the fact that it would cost consumers hundreds of dollars over the course of the year. Now, how do you like paying $18 for a quarter pounder with cheese meal? I actually love those. I'll pay the 18, but it's a lot more than I used to pay. But if that's not bad enough, new findings from the Tax Foundation, pay attention to this. They show that Biden's tax hike and his plan would cost nearly 800,000 jobs in the country. And now the Biden administration, they're canceling plans to actually refill the emergency strategic petroleum reserves. Remember, they were severely depleted to combat soaring prices after Joe enacted his radical climate policies because Joe needed lower prices before the 2022 midterm elections. Here with reaction, he is the host of the highly successful show Kudlow on the Fox Business Network, our sister network. All right. They're trying now to force truckers to get electric 18-wheelers. They don't want 18-wheelers. They can't afford to turn in their trucks. I have friends in the trucking business, Larry, and they're telling me they've gone through the worst trucking recession in 20 to 30 years recently. And what most people may not know is after a truck has X 100,000 miles on it, it goes in, It gets new brakes, new tires, it gets completely refurbished, a new engine, and it goes back out on the road for another 300,000 or 400,000 miles. Most people would think they buy new trucks. They don't. They can't afford them.
Well, first of all, Sean, thanks for having me back. Mr. Buttigieg is very badly mistaken. Consumer demand for EVs is really low. I mean, it's only 7% of the cars on the road today are electric vehicles. So if you're going to get rid of gas cars in the next 5 years or 8 years, I don't know how you're going to do it. They're way too expensive, these EVs. You can't afford the insurance, which is skyrocketing because it costs so much to repair them, and they do get into accidents. The car loan rates are up around 10 or 12%, so that's another problem. And if that weren't bad enough, the whole thing's a gift to China. I mean, China has the rare earths to make the batteries. China subsidizes their electric vehicle cars. What they're doing now is they're assembling them in Mexico so they can come into the U.S. below the tariff rates, and we have to stop that. Otherwise, our whole car business is going to be put completely out of business, whether it's Detroit or the South. So I'll just say this. I think Mr. Buttigieg is pushing the party line, but unfortunately, consumers don't want it. Consumers can't afford it. And I hope, Sean, we can talk for a moment. One reason they can't afford it is the Bidens want to literally tax people to death. Okay? I want to go through their tax plans because they are killers and they should be a campaign election issue.
All right. So the other two things that I would add to this is to build these batteries, you have to actually pillage Mother Earth for the manganese and the nickel needed to build the batteries, and you got to use heavy-duty equipment to do it. Most of our power grid is still based on fossil fuels, the vast overwhelming majority. So when you're charging it up, guess what? Fossil fuels are at the baseline bottom of it. Add to that a recent study report that shows that EVs might be polluting the planet more than gas-powered vehicles because they're so heavy, and the particles from the tires are far more damaging to the environment than a gas-run vehicle. I'm not a scientist. I read it. You read it. But something to consider. With that said, I believe in freedom. If you want an EV, go get a Tesla. If you don't want one, don't force Ford into losing $4.5 billion.
Consumer choice. This is a free country. Consumer choice, okay? If they can fix the EVs up and figure out a way to make them better or cheaper, I'm all for it. But don't stop gasoline-powered cars. People want a choice. Look, Sean, one other point. You raised it in your opening. The Biden tax proposals, okay? $3 to $4 trillion in taxes, okay? Individual tax hikes, corporate business tax hikes. The capital gains tax would go to 50%. Foreign income by American companies doubles from 10 to 21%. And if that weren't bad enough, the plan would allow foreign governments, particularly the European Union, to figure out a minimum tax on American companies. So we wouldn't be deciding our taxes. They would be deciding our taxes. And you're right, the Tax Foundation priced this out, and the Tax Foundation is very good. It'll cost 800,000 jobs. It would also reduce GDP by over 2% a year. It would also reduce wages by nearly 2% a year. And let me make the wage point. I've made it with you before. Biden's Achilles heel has been the decline in real wages because prices have risen much faster than wages, especially essentials like groceries and energy. This is an absolute killer. This tax plan would jack up taxes so much that middle-income folks, working folks, lower-income folks, again, working folks, blacks, Hispanics, whites, you name it, they will all be forced to lose even more income. And the last point I want to make is, under the Trump administration, typical families increase their income by $6,000. So far, under the Biden administration, typical families have lost over $2,000. That's a big spread of $8,000, and that's going to be an affordability issue that's going to be a killer in this election.
Let me tell you, peace and prosperity, especially prosperity, drive elections. It'll have a big impact in 215 days.
Yes.
Larry Kudlow, great to see you, my
Yes.
friend. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.